Now that you know how to create and instantiate a class, you are now ready to learn how to initialize an object using a constructor. So basically, a constructor is a method that is being called automatically if one is defined when the class is being instantiated. So we can basically use the constructor to initialize our class to define what would be the initial behavior of the class when an object is being created from the class. So let's quickly see an example of how we can do this in PHP. To create a constructor, we simply come here and type public function __ construct. This is a method that will be called automatically when an instance of this class is being created. So we can actually pass in parameters to this method that will be used to initialize the class. So for example, we want to pass in a parameter called type, and then we also want to pass in a parameter called duration, and then we want to pass in another parameter called the title. We can then immediately assign the values that have been passed in through this constructor method to the properties of this class. So we can come down here and say this type should be equal to the parameter type that will be passed in when the object is created. And then we can say this duration should be equal to the parameter duration. And then we can say this title should be equal to the title parameter. Now, if we scroll down, you can see that my text editor is already indicating to me that I am not passing in the required parameter when I'm creating an instance of this class. I need to actually pass in the required parameters. So the first one would be the type. So I'm going to say this is MP4. And then the next one will be the duration. So I'm going to set this to 10 minutes and 30 seconds. The last one is the title. So let's say this is Introduction to OOP. So it's also going to be MP4, 13 minutes and 30 seconds. And then this is going to be the second video. And then I'm going to comment at the content type and do a var on introduction. So let me do a reload on the browser. Then you can see here that we have the object. You can see that the title string is set to Introduction to OOP. And then you can also see that the duration is set to 1030 and the type is MP4. Let's just exit out of here. Okay, so we can say the type, duration, the published art, and then the title of this particular video. So once this object is being created, whatever values that we pass through here will be taken and then used to set the various properties that we defined inside of the constructor. That will be the same thing for video 2. So if we just come down, do a var on video 2, and then let us do a reload on the browser. You can now see the type is MP4, the duration is 13 minutes and 30 seconds. Published is a Boolean false, while the title is a string, the second video. When using a constructor, we can actually specify default values. So if I want this to have a default value, I can then specify a default type. So I would say MP4. I can specify a default duration just in case they don't specify a duration. So this will actually prevent any error from occurring. So we can set a default title and say this is default. So if I come down here and remove all of these, the class is still going to be okay because we have actually set default values for this particular object. So it will use the default value. But if we remove the default values, then we are now going to get errors. So let me take this out, then also take out the one for duration and also the one for title. And now let's do a reload on the browser. Here's a missing argument 1 for video, missing argument 2 for video, missing argument 3 for video, and then we get all of these errors. And then finally, when the object is displayed, you can see that everything is set to none other than the published property which we have defined implicitly to be false. And before we wrap up this lecture, I'm just going to show you another important method which PHP provides for us, which is called the Destructor. Just like the constructor method, the destructor is also going to be initialized automatically once the object has finished all of the operations that we defined for that object. So let's come down here and then create the destructor public function underscore destruct. And then inside of the destructor, we can then say var_dump destroying instance of, then we can just put the name of the class. We can use the PHP method get class to get the name of the class. The destructor is the opposite of the constructor in the sense that it is going to destroy the object once it notices that the object no longer has anything to do. Let's reload the browser again. You can see here destroying instance of video. Destroying instance of video. You can see that this actually happened twice because we have two instances that were created for video. You can see that we have the first instance, which is introduction, and the second instance, which is actually video 2. And then finally, we can also be very strict here when we are passing in parameters to the constructor. So for example, I can say I want the type to always be a string, so I can type int it just like this. And then I can also say let the duration be a float, and then let the title be a string. Let's now come down to the part where we created an instance of the class and then change the duration to a string. And then call this duration. Let me now do a var_dump on introduction and then do a reload. You can see uncaught type error, argument 2 passed to video must be of type float, string given. We are saying whatever value that will be passed to this constructor when an instance of this class wants to be created, it must be of type string, which is the type, and then for the duration it must be of type float, and then for the title it must be a string. Once we violate that, PHP is actually going to throw a factor error. But if we return this back to a float, let's just say 10.5, and then do a reload, you can see that everything runs as intended right now. And then you can see right here that it says duration is now a float. Okay, so that'll be all for this lesson. I'll see you in the next lecture.